And today she'll be sharing with us some of the tactics and the overall experience that she had at her previous role as the Group CX Director at Citrix, and how she helped to drive a massive sort of cultural and organizational change at the company as they adopted a lot more UX practices and general design thinking. So yeah, she'll share some great experiences here with everybody. And before we get started, just a few quick words in case you guys aren't familiar with UXPin. We are a collaborative design platform for product teams. So we're basically an end-to-end platform. You can wireframe, prototype, do user testing, all in one place with your team, consolidate feedback, and design together. You can also create custom pattern libraries and scale your design systems with your libraries. So component-based design and all that good stuff. And without further ado, yeah, I'll hand it over to Julie.
Great, thanks so much. And thanks to the folks at UXPin for hosting this webinar and working with me on the ebook. You guys have been really terrific. So just a little bit of background on who I am. So again, hi, I'm Julie Baher. I'm currently the Senior Director of User Experience at Illumina. You guys can Google Illumina, but we're actually a really big biotech company. So for me and my career, this has been a new change to work on UX in a new industry. So I've been really excited since I've been here about a year. But before that, I was at Citrix for 5 years, and I'll talk about that experience today in this presentation. I'd also worked at Adobe on the Creative Suite products, both in user research and in managing design teams. I've worked at Xerox. I've done the ultra huge company experience and working on their website. And my first job in UX was for a company called Unext that did online education, distance learning out in Chicago. So just a little background on who I am and the different types of places I've worked for. It's been a range from the startups to the 70,000 person Xerox to most recently in Adobe, Citrix, and Illumina. Those places have been between 2,000 and 10,000 people as they evolved and grew their businesses. So for those of you who might not be familiar with Citrix, they're in the business of doing things like desktop virtualization, products you might know, like the GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar, and those kind of products. But for the most part, they made their business over the last 20 plus years doing products that are sold to an IT audience. And so at the time that they started a design movement, it was similar to what a lot of companies are doing, is to say, hey, we need to differentiate, we need to do something different, but we know this design thing is great. That's kind of all we know. And so what that journey looked like over the 5 years I was there was from starting at a place in a company that's, you ran into people who said, I didn't even know we had a design team. So my boss, Catherine Courage, was brought in to start a design team. And so it started pretty small, just a handful of people. When I joined, there were maybe 8 of us. And as it evolved over the years, people got to know us, people got to see our work. They would start to request to have a designer on their project. And our mission expanded. We brought not just UX design, but also design thinking in around 2012. And then people would say, well, I've heard of that, but what is that? And as we worked with them and educated them, then they would say, oh, I get it. I get that design's important. I'm doing design thinking. And about that point, we rebranded to be the customer experience team. And then people were like, okay, now what's that thing? And, you know, through more working with teams, we started some programs more around using these design skills for innovation. So I'll walk you through this journey and tell you a little bit about how we got there and things we did, and hopefully give you some tips and tricks and things that you might be able to apply to where you work. So just to set the stage and go on a little time travel back, we're in our little time machine to 2010. So this was my first experience coming to my new job at Citrix, getting off the elevator, walking down the hall. As you can see, it was a pretty Pretty exciting office. You know, the plant is barely getting over the wall to get some light there with these high-walled gray cubes. This pretty much gives you a picture of the environment, very inspirational. This is actually the cubes where we sat. And then digging in not just to the physical environment, but also figuring out who our customer was. I asked around, like, what do we have? Does anyone have personas? And they sent me this deck. And you can see from this first page, they've got 6 different types of users listed here. That seemed like, you know, it's all right, but it's quite a lot. But actually, it went on and on. So then there was 6 more users too, that there's the customer. And then on to the point you can see here, like they've even run out of clip art. There's just so many users. Every single person was a different role. They're saying, well, that's a different kind of user. So there isn't any discipline about understanding who the customers were. And then digging in on the software side, this is the before view, a little montage of some of the wall of shame, as I would call it. The products were really all over the board in terms of the user experience, in terms of how well they worked for the customers. You can see this Dazzle product here. I mean, this is actually, I'm not kidding, the product name was Dazzle. It had this Star Wars effect with these light rays shooting through, and when you turned it on, it made a sound. So that was a little horrific to some of us. And then there's just a couple other screenshots here, but these are the typical kind of error messages. We would see things that aren't written with a customer in mind. And a lot of Me Too designs. This Dazzle was a very iTunes App Store look, circa probably 2005. So a lot of what we were dealing with was just a mishmash of products, you know, people trying their best, but not really understanding who they were designing for and what the user's goals were. So what I want to share with you is lessons around the culture change and how we thought about not so much the design process and that part of it, but around how we engaged with the other employees to try to bring more awareness to the design process, to engage people in the activities, and to change some of the behaviors around how products were designed, but also how internal things and tools were designed too. So the first lesson is about making a splash. This is really about how do you have a presence, how do you get yourself, your design function known at your company. So this starts in the beginning when people didn't even know we had a design team. And like probably many of you, we worked at a fairly distributed company. So we were based in an office in Santa Clara, California, but we had colleagues working in Florida in an office there, in the UK, in India, so really around the world. So it wasn't that people would necessarily see us day to day or even realize some new employees had joined the company. So one of the first things we were lucky to participate in was one of our customer events. So like probably some of your companies, whether it's at a small scale with user group meetings or a large scale like hosting their own convention, Citrix hosts its own convention a couple times a year. They do one in San Francisco at the Moscone Center. And this is where the IT customers in particular come to learn about new products. So what we did was say, you know, the customers are coming to us. Let's go. We can do some user research, but we can also let the customers and the other employees know about our team and what we're doing here. So this is a view of the booth we had. So, and again, like wherever you work, you can talk to there's always often people who coordinate events or customer events and see if you can get a space. So we got a space for a booth, perfectly situated on the path to the men's room. If any of you work in IT, you'll know that's a very male-dominated field. So we've got a lot of foot traffic coming through. And what we did here was a couple of different things. And I'll show you some pictures over the years. But we started a lot, as you can see from the quite obvious branding, talking about what design meant at Citrix and coming up with activities to engage the customers. Now, while we were learning a lot about customers, the other real side benefit was that all the employees who were coming to the conference, working at the conference, from the salespeople to the technical engineers to product management, they all came through too. And that's where the quote, "I didn't know we had a design team," came from, was from those conversations we had. So as we evolved this over the years, we did a lot of things to figure out, how can we learn about these customers from being at these events? Because we could start to, not just for our own benefit, learn about them, but also connect that to the other customers, but to the other employees too. So by making it a public user research project, it really engaged the employees in it too. So you can see what we had here was this big "Who are you?" with these 4 different silhouettes on it. And what we wanted to do was go and say, look, there's different kinds of customers showing up at the events. As they come and we have these little side conversations with them, let's start to write up some information about who they are and build this out. So I'll share a little bit of that with you here just to show you how this activity worked. And here's Sarah, who now is at LinkedIn, but when she was running the booth there, one of the user researchers. So she created with some of her colleagues these cards. And so what we did when the customers came up, we took a picture of them and captured just, your basic questions you're going to want to ask as a researcher. Who are you? What is your job? What are the key workflows you're doing? What are your goals? What are you trying to achieve? And then what are the top obstacles you face? So what are the pain points, whether just in general or pain points around our products that we were interested in? And so we collected these, and you can see here's some real examples. There's a card I filled out too, just to get the ball rolling here. And then this was great. So we posted up during the event so people would come by and could read and learn about the customers. And then after the event, we peel these all off, and then we're able to type them in a computer and then include this content as we're developing personas and looking for common patterns and common pain points. Here's just a couple other screenshots to give you a sense of how this worked. And you can see how the booth is here. So there's a lot of ways, I think, that you in the audience, for those of you who are designers, that you can really creatively engage people in these design thinking activities and think a little bit outside of the box. So that was our story about starting to get our team known, just one of the things we did, as well as understanding who our customers are and starting to spread that around the company. Just one of the things we did. So just to summarize this first idea on how do you get known, the key things you want to do is put yourself out there, get in front of coworkers. You can leverage existing structures. I've shown a more extreme event because I think it was sort of an interesting thing, but there's lots of things, whether you're doing one-on-ones with people and you have a little slide deck that you're sharing with people to tell them about design and show them examples, or there's all hands meetings. My current job at Illumina, the developers have a sort of a once or twice a month they will do presentations that are of interest to developers, and so they've invited us to come speak at those, and several of the designers on my team have given talks on design and agile or design and doing user research. So there's a lot of ways, if you look around, that you can make sure that people know what you're doing and know what you're there, because that's things you can leverage as you want to start to think about the culture and evangelizing things like design thinking. And the other thing, the same thing holds true for Adobe. They do have some conferences, but we also use the space in the building in San Francisco to run our own user group meetings. And so we just through Craigslist, we could recruit customers and have them come and then do roundtables with them. So there's a lot of ways that you can creatively help get other people in your company exposure to your users. So the next thing I want to talk about is about the Design Matters campaign, and you saw a little bit of that in the images earlier on in the slides. And so like I mentioned, we started focusing at first on the products we inherited and the user experience, and then through a number of us going to some of the executive education at Stanford, really started to move into thinking about design thinking and how you could apply these same designer skills to other problems in the business, not just to the current products at hand. And just for a little definition, and I think most folks today are familiar with this, but when we talked about design thinking at Citrix, it's really three things. So it's empathy, putting yourself in the user's shoes; ideating, so taking what you've learned from the customers, trying to solve those problems, coming up with different visions for the future; and then prototyping the vision and iterating on that and testing. So this was how we defined and talked about design thinking as we worked with folks at the company. And so, of course, our first inclination is coming back from these trainings we've gone to, like, we're all jazzed up, let's teach everyone. So we led a number of classes and workshops, and this is the numbers over the 5 years at the company, going around to different offices. We worked with Kim Goodwin to put together some, I'd say, kind of more classroom-based training, so teaching people about design thinking, about user research, about working with designers. And we, again, look at very events and all hands and any place we could get in front of people and help engage them. So what I do want to share with you, that was a couple of the other somewhat subversive ways we also tried to reach out to people. And this is, while design is very important and matters, you'll learn very quickly that food is most important to people. So through what I would call some soft and tasty bribes, we managed to also involve a lot of people in learning about design thinking, even if it was in part to satisfy a sugar craving. So one of the things that my awesome colleague Meg had the idea of, Meg was consumed with the idea of pop-ups, and this was several years back, pop-up restaurants, pop-up stores, and she's like, let's do a pop-up design studio. And so we got the idea that we could do this in our cafe, and these are some of the posters. So we put posters around the office saying, the customer experience team is trading some filled coffee and cupcakes for your input on collaboration, new hire onboarding, and learning resources. So we partnered with HR and facilities around some topics they were in, partnered with some of our coworkers who had access to a lot of drip coffee and cupcakes, and then so I'll share a little bit how this rolled, hoping to inspire someone else to take up this idea of pop-up design studios. So you can see here, like, this is pretty much what we did. This is a corner of our cafe, and we just took our whiteboards on wheels and little whiteboard tables and pushed them through the elevators and down the halls and created a space. Some of my colleagues, you can see Ross all here, who are also manning the booth and helping keep the people flowing. And how it worked was people came in, and first we did this little fun name exercise. You can see from both this and my previous example that we bought one of those Polar cameras that we were a little obsessed with, so any excuse to use it came in handy. So people started with their name. They wrote down a superhero that they had, and you can see this board getting filled up with all these pictures of the employees' mugshots. And then there were several activities, and people could go to whatever interested them. And you can see this is one of the ones. I'll zoom in on it. This was a project we were doing with facilities. So our facilities group was in the middle of redesigning a lot of the offices and wanted to really engage the employees more. So again, they wanted to be more customer-centric in their own work. So we came up with this brainstorming board, and you can see we had these images as prompts, and then people were noting like what it was about that they liked to relate to redesigning the actual cafe space. And here you can see this as it mapped out throughout the day. Now, another one of the projects we had was we worked a lot with the HR teams. And I'll say that in general, the HR teams are really open and excited about doing things to be more user-centric. But you'll find it's funny, internal teams sometimes themselves aren't also very user-centric. So they were doing a lot of work on onboarding new hires. So that project to help other people with, and it's a great place to test out your skills with, because most places are always looking to their employee onboarding better. So we came up with this activity of having the employees create their experience. I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see what this is, but basically it was called it was almost like love letters to new employees, and you can see the format, but it was just, what advice do you have? What things should you do at work? What things should you not do? Who should you meet? So it was really fun. And then what we were able to do with that, again, like you can see it build out, was, I'll show you in another page, turn that into this book, which was for new hires. This was for, because it was Santa Clara, but welcome letters for Santa Clara. And then we repeated this in a few of the other locations. I'll just rewind for a second. This was our Alan and Orlando, who were responsible for the cupcake and pour over coffee. The good thing is, if you do a pour over coffee, it's very slow, and it forced people to engage in the activities while they were waiting for their coffee. So another little handy tip there if you want to replicate this. And you can see this is just one of the blurb books. We did a lot of versions on this. We partnered also with our corporate citizenship team and did another pop-up studio in our Florida office in their cafe. And this one focused, again, using design tasks, things like empathy, and to have employees talk about their experience, things they do to volunteer more with the community. This is just one example of these 6 stories, but people wrote about their own experiences volunteering in 6 words. And so you can see a couple of examples, like fed the hungry with a big heart, and here helped women in distress in community. And they posted these all. And again, that part of the idea was to think of ways to engage people around the idea of empathy and understanding users, customers, humans, other people. So the key takeaways that I want you to have from those kind of stories is, there's a lot of ways you can teach and evangelize design thinking. We do like traditional classroom training, but the thing we came to that really mattered was to really do more learn by doing, and things that are hands. It's sometimes good to have people work on something a little off topic than the products they work on, so it is helpful for them to think about whether it's volunteering or new hires or something completely not work related. Because then they're in a space they can learn about it, and they're not distracted by, how can I sell this product and other concerns. There's a number of good resources that you'll see in a UXPin ebook that's coming out soon that I worked with the team on, but I've listed a few here in the slides. You can look up Stanford or the Design Thinking Educators Kit, and all these things have activities you can grab that are anything from an hour or 2 long to longer, that you can try out with people at your company. So you don't need to be a curriculum designer to figure out how to do these things. There's a lot of kits and tools out there to help you spread the word and sort of teach the methods to people. We also did some wine, and this is just to share with you what happens if you mix alcohol with design training, is you get people doing pyramids in your office. So I'll just say you might want to think twice about that one. So now the third part I want to talk about is bringing it back more to the business. And this one is what I'm calling count to 100. So as this, and we've been doing thinking, which I think is a great tool for tools for empathy, for understanding customers, for coming up with a great idea. The next question is, well, how do you go from the idea to something that's productized, that becomes some new offering from your company? How do you figure that out? And a lot of what you start to be asked for, you show are from this effort. A lot of us in design sometimes struggle with that. To build 2 products that came built by designers and the one that no designer built. You be testing at a certain level. So I'll tell a little bit about how we went about finding some projects we could work on to pilot this. I'll share some examples of measures and metrics we use to look at ROI, and then I'll talk a little bit about Lean Startup and how we integrated ideas from Lean Startup into our larger practice. So just to give you a little bit of a word slide with a lot of words, but one of the important things is culture change. You need some sponsorship from executives. You know, you can do a lot, but it's good to have someone who's very senior who's saying, I believe in this, this is important, we should try this out. So these are a couple things that you need to do as you're working to get buy-in from executives and then come up with your first project. So first is obvious. The executives need to know what design thinking is, and most importantly, how it's going to meet the business goals.
Hey, Julie.
So, yeah.
It's Jerry here. I think some people here had mentioned that, sorry to interrupt, they mentioned there's some choppiness in the audio. I'm not sure if it's something on your end or where you're located. I know everything worked out pretty well yesterday when we tested the technology. Are you in a different room, maybe?
I'm in a different room, but that's about it.
Okay, give me a moment here. Let's see. Yeah, they mentioned something about the audio being choppy on your end. And let's see. Everything seems to be okay here.
Is there a phone number I could call in on an actual telephone?
Yeah. You want to try calling in on the number? Let me actually type in the dial-in, and then we can do it that way. Sorry, everybody. Let's actually just pause this real quick, and we'll have Julie dial in. It'll only take a moment here. Julie, let me. I have your text here, so why don't I just text you the number that you can call in, and then that should work just fine.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem. You know, these things happen. Let me pull up the dial-in information here. I have that in my Zoom account. And I'll actually send that over to you in one moment here. Let's see. Okay. So try this dial-in, 646.
Okay.
558. 8656.
Okay, and then do I have to key in something after?
Yeah, and the webinar ID. And the webinar ID is 720 654 315.
Okay. 315. Okay, I'm going to disconnect from the computer audio so we don't get some kind of crazy cycle and see if it works.
Cool. Great. We'll see you in a moment. Thanks everyone for being patient here. It's funny, sometimes technology just doesn't work when you need it to work the most. Yeah, everybody here is having some really good questions so far. She's going to get into kind of the full cycle of the story here and exploring what some of the ROI was and yep. Julie, are you there?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now, Julie.
Okay, I just hung up the phone. Let me just try on the computer again, and if people still find it choppy, can you let folks know?
Yep, absolutely. Great.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries.
All right, hang on. Let me fix these windows now. Okay, we're good? Everyone's seeing the slides again?
Yep, it all looks good.
All right, perfect. Let me go through this kind of quick because I'm sure people might have customers and customers might have questions. And so now we lost a couple of minutes on our tech stuff.
We're actually pretty good on time, Julie, so I think we'll be okay.
Okay, perfect. So here's just some advice on getting buy-in. So like I was starting to say, one of the things you want to do is look for a challenge or an opportunity that would resonate with the executives. You might not want to pick something completely high stakes. And some of the things we did that were good starting points to get the kinks out in our system were things like looking at employee onboarding. You can look at internal IT calls, and I'll share another example of a project we did. You're going to want some kind of elevator pitch. As you see the new UXPin book that's coming out, or you look online, you might want to start collecting examples of how other companies or industries have used design thinking and the kind of results they've had. There's some great stories from places like GE and Intuit. And a lot of these companies have really nice examples of where they went out, saw a user problem, did some user-centered design work, and then have actual numbers in terms of improvements to the business. So I really encourage you to start a collection of those things, and we've shared a number with them in the ebook. Like I mentioned, we want to come up with a trial project, something short too. You know, you don't want to spend a whole year on this. So if you can scope things to be pretty small and have someone who's a senior executive be the sponsor, that would be great. And what you're going to want from the sponsor is just someone who will sort of clear any big barriers. They'll help you assemble a small team of people from other areas of the company to work with you. You know, if you're lucky, you have a product manager who wants to try something different, and you could work with them. But if you want to kind of branch out in the company, think about some of the other teams. So one of the projects I'll share with you to give you an example was working actually with the legal team. And I will just be the first one to say, I never thought that we would find the most open, innovative people to be in our legal team. But it was a really great experience. And the problem they came to us with was every year they're required to get all the employees to go through compliance training. And those of you who've worked at any large organization at some point have probably had to sit through you know, anti-bribery training, sexual harassment training. There's all these different online or in-person things that every so often, once a year, you have to get recertified on and take, and it's, you know, probably not your favorite thing to do. Some of the problems that they knew about was that it took like an army of people to nag everyone to do this. They want to be compliant and have 100% of employees do the required trainings, but that then involved HR people telling you to take these trainings. And so we were making everyone miserable. The employees didn't enjoy the experience. The HR people were frustrated because it really wasn't their function that was telling people to do it. They were just helping the legal team. So no one was really happy. So we started off with a team, and we assembled some folks from design and HR and legal. You can see we did a lot of interviews with employees to really understand the problems. And then we started prototyping different solutions, you know, different ways that we could offer the training, different ways we should really go back and question some fundamental assumptions about, well, do you really need to take the same online course every year, or what do we really need to do? And so out of that, you can see we started from the interviews and the empathy. We did some brainstorming around the courses, and then we came up with a pilot program that we could roll out to just a small group of employees and see how well it worked. These are some examples. So as we were prototyping, you can see just, you know, again, the classic stickies, but we also had foam core and other things. We were mocking up, you know, what if it was a webinar? What if we gave you incentives to take the courses? What if you could take a course and, you know, a donation was made to charity? Like, we had a whole bunch of different ideas out there on the table. And then what came of it was Peter, who was the lawyer who we worked with, we nominated him to be a design hero, which was a program that our own team ran, so it's not hard to win the award. But what we really wanted to do was publicize the success. So I'll tell you, out of all those ideas, there were a number of things that he was able to do. So improving the actual training experience, not blanketing it so everyone in the company had to take it, being really thoughtful about which groups really were at risk for bribery. Like, I would always joke, like, yeah, I wish I was in a position to be bribed, but I just don't think like my role as a UX leader is the same as a salesperson selling in around the world. So, you know, by redesigning the program, by realizing that people didn't have to take things every year, they could just recertify out of it, by changing the way we nagged people so we didn't put the HR people in the center. We redesigned. It was a real service design, like the people part of the process, the actual training courses. And then to show that there was some ROI in this, some of the folks on my team worked with the finance team to say, how could we really measure what the impact is? Like, we know this has got to be better. So you can see from the numbers here, we just looked at, okay, based on this new program, how much time have we freed up from people that they would have wasted either on these courses or wasted nagging people? And in 1 year, we estimated that it was over 9,000 work hours. And the finance people helped us come up with a model to turn the time equals money into money. And so those were the numbers we were able to share. So this was something that I was able to present back, not just with Peter, but to his management team. So the legal team rolled up to the our head of sort of operations and HR. So sharing with him, like, look, this is a project we did together. This was the benefit to the company. And then we also tried to leverage internal tools like the intranet to publish these things. So to talk a little bit more about how to embed design thinking into broader processes at work, I want to just talk for a few minutes about design thinking and lean startup and how I see those fitting together. So we've talked a lot about design thinking in this hour. If you think about lean startup just in a very simplified format, you're starting with a hypothesis. So you have this idea, like you've come up with a new shoe you think is going to be more comfortable for running. And what you want to do is go out and test it. So this is familiar to designers, this iterating. But you're also testing the business model and the approach, like what they tend to talk about is product market fit. Like you might have come up with this idea for a shoe and you think it's great for people who do triathlons, but as you test it, you learn, well, the shoe is fine, but that's the wrong market for the shoe. It turns out it's excellent for, toddlers learning to walk, and I'm going to like pivot on my design a bit and on like how I would market this product. So what I think lean startup adds is sort of your follow-on to having some prototypes and some ideas is like, okay, how do you bring that into the market and continue to learn and iterate with users, but also think about it as a business. And so I'll just talk a little bit about some of the measures we used at Citrix and some of the processes there. One of the big things that Citrix became interested in was having some kind of measure we could use across all the products, not just the products, but services like technical support and customer service. And what they landed on was looking at Net Promoter Score. I'm sure a lot of you work at places that might be using this. So I'll talk a little bit about my views on this and what I learned from this experience. For those of you who don't know, Net Promoter Score is a system for getting feedback, and it's based on a single question, which is how likely are you to recommend us to your friends or colleagues? Even if your company's not using it, you've probably been asked this question on many, many websites and services that you've used, and now you'll start to notice it, and now you'll realize who is doing that promoter score out there. It's based on this book, and I would highly recommend it, called The Ultimate Question. One of the things one of the senior vice presidents did is say, everyone needs to read this book. Bought 1,600 copies, first division, gave it to all of us. If you ever asked a question, which you should have known the answer to on this book, it would be like, did you read the book? So I got this as part of that, the introduction to Net Promoter Score. And I thought, this has got to be the dumbest, sorry for the PowerPoint to Google Docs, we've lost it, or the dumbest question ever. But really, as I dug more into it, and if you go back and I would say like read this book, and I can also, if you're interested, recommend some good videos to you. It's not about a single question, and it's similar in how it aligns to design thinking. It's about having leadership commitment to getting user feedback on your products and experiences. It's about having a common language. If you're really doing Net Promoter Score and asking customers for feedback, if you're really implementing the system, you're supposed to learn from the feedback and make improvements. And all of this to me is the design process. Using a question like this to drive your business is focusing the company on customer loyalty. So it's not looking at money and bottom line numbers. It's really looking at, are your customers happy with what you're doing? If they're not happy, what do we need to do to fix it? And it's putting in some analytics infrastructure to figure it out. So if we give them more color choices, does that make them happier? It's really thinking through sort of like the A/B testing that a lot of us are used to in an even broader sense, not just the product, but what are the other levers that would make your customers happier? So there's a lot to learn from that. So I think it's an interesting thing to be open to. But I'll tell you, my initial reaction was like, this is crazy. And so a lot of what we started to do was to look at our Net Promoter Score, and a lot of you might be familiar with GoToMeeting. And again, this was a product we had a lot of feedback, ironically, about audio issues, and that, as you now all know, is a common problem with this whole category of products. It's very hard, and people will blame the product when it's really just the state of the internet today. But in addition to that, using Net Promoter Score, we had a lot of other feedback from customers. And so as we worked to design things, this became a great measure to show that listening to the users, in addition to the Net Promoter Score, but the field research we would do with customers and usability sessions, we could actually show that we were improving the product. So you can see that I'm just sharing a few things like we instrumented this at very specific places. So we've got the iOS app. We were able to improve the App Store rating. There's a 10-point increase on our web client and the GoTo product. We also could see a decrease in calls to support. And I'll share with you in a more consolidated list. These are a lot of good measures that you can use. So again, think about all the different places where you're hoping design makes a difference. Do you have Net Promoter Score or a different customer satisfaction metric you can use? You can always go to your tech support group and find out what are the top call drivers, and then think about how to change that list. And then, are there ways you're actually helping save the organization? Because things are, you've created this like sort of opportunity, whether it's a productivity increase or maybe a new business product that's going to bring in more money. So just to sum up this part, I think, as you put together ideas like design thinking and lean startup and start to embed that in the culture, some of the things to be mindful of is, how do you create a shared language? So the great thing about these things, each one by itself might not be perfect. There's always the next new thing, but it gives you a shared language to talk to other employees about. So if you're going to use the word empathy, if you're going to talk about test and learn, or, doing a pilot, or Net Promoter Score, by doing the education and stuff, it's sort of a simple thing, but just the way we all speak a certain language in different countries, like that starts to build part of the culture and part of people feeling like they're part of the inside. It's also important as you think about the measurements, and I've mentioned a few, but you want to share those in the sense that you want to have the same goals as your product manager. So if you can get aligned between product management, engineering, UX, and any other team that, hey, this new features or this product, we're doing this because we expect it to change our Net Promoter Score and have happier customers. Then you're working together and you're understanding the bigger why of what you're doing. And the last thing that's important too is the performance measures, not just that are these external ROI, but also like, how are you measured if you're an employee? What is your boss measuring you on? What is your business unit measuring you on? At Citrix, we were able to get design thinking to be one of the kind of core competencies that all employees were expected to know something about. So that was one. That was one really fortunate outcome of this. But then on a smaller level too, there's things like if you're doing annual goals, like it's good if you're being held accountable and how your job is measured and your work is measured in a similar way. So those are the three lessons I wanted to share with you today. And I have just a little extra bonus in the spirit of improv and saying yes and a couple other things in terms of what it takes. So one is to really understand the culture you're in, and I called it microclimates. If you've got a big organization or lots of different teams, not every team works the same way, not every office is the same. So go out, do your own internal ethnography and learn about your coworkers. Try to engage both the qualitative and the quantitative in the work you do and how you think about design thinking and measurement. I also say be bold and take risks. We tried all these crazy things, and I wanted to share some of them with you. Um, you don't have much to lose, and it's kind of a nice way to push the field forward to say, look, what are other ways we can engage people around design thinking? Try to find projects that are not super high visibility to pilot your things on, where you can take a risk. And also, we always would say, trust the process. I mean, all of you who work in design know, it can be uncertain when you're in this more innovative space and trying to figure out what to do next and what's important. And a lot of the teams would come to us and say, well, how long will this take? How long is it going to take to build the solution? We'd say, well, we're starting with customer empathy. So until we learn what the problem is we want to solve, I can't tell you if the solution is bigger than a bread box or smaller than a bread box. So a lot of it was learning ourselves to just trust that we know we'll come out of this on the other side with something more tangible. But that beginning part of the funnel where it's all open and you're still learning about, you're doing some empathy work and you're ideating, you're going, as the folks at Intuit would call it, you're going really broad, but you have to trust that it will narrow down into something more tangible, which is what, at the end of the day, most folks who come to work are used to having, clear tasks and objectives. And so they're more scared by that open innovation space. So that's my extra advice to all of you. And I just want to thank, again, to the UXPin folks and to my whole team at Citrix, who was really a part of this journey, for all your work on this. Any of you, please do reach out. I'm happy to share more information or answer questions or have conversations. And I've really appreciated this time. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks, Julie. Yeah, that was excellent. Even though we had some technical hiccups, I'm glad we were able to kind of get through that. So before we get into the Q&A, we've got a couple questions here. I'm going to actually start this poll here, and just like we did on the last session with Satyam, this poll here is going to help us better understand the challenges that the attendees face in the UX process, and so that will help us to better tailor future webinars. So if everybody can help just contribute and put down what challenges they might face in the UX process, that will be fantastic information for us. And I'll let the poll run through the entirety of the Q&A session here. So we've got about 8 questions so far here. So I'll just go ahead and go through them. And so Vanessa actually has a great question here, which is, what would be your suggestion on how to break some of the political bias and ask for executive sponsorship?
I think part of what we thought about a lot was doing, if you look up sort of stakeholder mapping as an activity, thinking about who are the friendlies. So start with the ones that are more predisposed to want to work with you and want to do things. So I would not start by going after the most difficult person, because a lot of what we thought about was like, let's work where we can get some traction, which was how we ended up a little bit with the HR team and the legal team. And then by doing those projects, we had something to show to the people who were more resistant and difficult, because they're saying, well, prove to me this can work and this can work here. So some of it was, think about who you can build some alliances with. Part of it starts by figuring out, if you don't have much exposure to these people, see if you can just meet them and learn about them and ask them more questions about who they are and what they're doing, because you might be able to then find that common ground of a project that you think they could get excited by.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's some great points. And Jen Dabari here has a question as well, a little bit more tailored towards building out teams, but do you have any suggestions for growing out design teams in a startup environment versus in a larger company?
I feel like I'd be plagiarizing from your webinar last week. Satnam gave a great webinar on that, but the difference I see just depends that you might want someone who's got more breadth of skills at a startup if you don't have a lot of resources, and that person has to stretch across you know, all the aspects of design, you know, whether they're doing visual design or interaction design. You know, if you're looking for someone who can also evangelize design thinking, some of the people coming out of the newer design programs, you know, you might want to look for someone like, hey, what are their presentation skills like? Can they speak to design and the importance of design in addition to actually doing the design work?
Right.
So, you know, when you're in a bigger company, you can get people who are more specialists who might not need to be completely jack of all trades.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's absolutely true based on sort of Satyam's advice, right? Having sort of T-shaped designers,
Mm-hmm.
and then let's see here. So the next question here is from Avik, who brings up an interesting point. And Avik says that he comes from an enterprise UX environment where he works mostly with startups in the APAC region. And sometimes he finds it very challenging for his clients in that particular geography to see the value in the user-centered design process. And the ROI of UX argument doesn't really convince them as much as it would, you know, maybe otherwise, because for them it seems like they're really just chasing after the MVP, so they want to just get, you know, the smallest, most viable thing out the door as quickly as possible. Seems like time to market is really the big, you know, concern there. So knowing that, do you have any suggestions or ideas for how to better get UX buy-in in that sort of an environment when you know, a company might be so laser focused on just getting something small out the door as fast as possible?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is you have to believe that, you know, even among, you're always making choices. So even if you say it's the MVP, there's probably 4 different MVPs that all could be viable minimal starting points. And, you know, you can start to use the UX tools to help people realize, like, we just want to help you make smarter choices. We're not trying to make this big loaded thing that has every bell and whistle because we think that delights people. You know, I think there's certainly starting out with some, maybe the end of the cycle. Sometimes you start with some usability to be like, well, if you think you're doing it right today, then these MVPs should be perfectly meeting customer needs. So if you can identify, you know what, it turns out there actually is a problem. This process we're doing is not really meeting their needs, and we're finding we have to keep adding and adding until we get to the right MVP. So I think there's first saying, is there really a problem that you can identify that they would then want to fix? I'd also say it's interesting. We ran these trainings with groups that were in APAC. So we actually went to India and did this, and we also worked with an office in Japan. And you know, I wouldn't assume that everyone isn't interested. Sometimes there's some of the cultures or some of the offices can be more hierarchical, and we noticed a big difference whether the senior leader was in the room or not in the room in terms of whether other people would speak up. So if there are opportunities to work with, you know, your peers or the more line managers, the everyday engineers by themselves, you might find that they'd be willing to be allies too with you on this. So that's what I would say, is to dig into, like, is there a way you can say, hey, if you look at it from this perspective, you know, if you look at our tech support calls, these 1.0 MVP products are a train wreck. And then people will say, oh, okay, I get it. And like, you're offering a solution.
Right. And Vanessa here actually has a really interesting question. So she says she's curious that, you know, as you switched from Citrix, which is enterprise, you know, business solutions and products, to Illumina, which is in the healthcare space, what has been sort of the biggest mind shift for you going into designing for human health? If there's been any real sort of interesting lessons or new perspectives that you've gained.
Sure. Yeah, it's really interesting, and there's sort of 2 aspects I'd say are interesting. I mean, one is, and this would be true in a few other fields, when you move into a more regulated design field too, it's interesting the other constraints you have. So if you want to produce a product that will be, according to the United States, the FDA, like a clinical product, there's a lot more process. I would say it's not so much for the design team, but you're just in an engineering process that does have more documentation requirements. There might be extra considerations, about doing sort of risk assessment. So some of the things that people trained in HCI, sort of traditional human factors training, that work actually comes in handy because it's sort of like flying an airplane. Like if you're designing the airplane cockpit, like you have to be really careful about how you make sure people don't make mistakes. So that's been sort of interesting on that angle. I mean, of course, it's been amazing to go talk to actual clinical practitioners and learn a new field. So there's a good scientific ramp up. The other thing that's been interesting is that a lot, it turns out, of the science software has been free. And so it's sort of like enterprise software in that sense. No one had put a lot of design thinking into it. Again, it's sort of like enterprise. Then some of the newer companies are coming along and trying to make like a better electronic medical record system. But the state of the art hasn't been all that fancy. So there's a lot of room to innovate and a lot of room to partner with your scientific colleagues so that you're learning enough to be able to do good design, but you're very dependent on the subject matter experts too.
Right. And Peter actually has a really interesting question. So he says that he's curious, why did you change the team name from to customer experience from user experience? And did the partners that you worked with understand the difference between the two?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think when we started, we were either UI or UX, and then we changed it to product design to be a little more broad. And we thought, a lot of us remember, it's still even true today, that user experience was always like, oh, what does that mean? And you get tired of explaining what your job is. So we thought, oh, product design, that makes more sense. But then the customer experience started to broaden more as, product design tends to be like, oh, well, you just design the products. And then when we wanted to look at, redesigning the experience people would have, with the help systems, with the call center, it sort of tied into work we were doing around journey mapping, which tends to have you look at the whole end-to-end process. And if you look up Forrester Research had a lot of articles on customer experience, and there's some articles like the rise of the chief customer experience officer. I think like that became a thing that companies are still doing. They're doing today, which is to say, we need to focus on all aspects of our customer experience. That usually is often included the services that a call center group does in addition to your product and your website.
Right. Yeah, that I know that customer experience is generally just a much more sort of holistic term than user experience, right? User experience generally applies to the experience of the user with a certain product. Customer experience kind of spans broader than that. You start to look at sort of all touch points of the user before they're a customer, while they're a customer, maybe even after, they're no longer a customer, and how they engage with the brand at that point.
Exactly. Yep.
And the next question here is from Sophie, who is working with a lot of developers, and she's curious, what might you suggest is the best way to engage professionals who have 15 or more years of industry experience, and they're very technical, and they're on the data team? How might you engage them with UX and design thinking and kind of make them care about the process?
Wow, that's a very familiar persona that I think we all run into working on this. I'd say one part is to make sure you've made it clear to them how much you respect their experience and their deep knowledge in the field, because I think a lot of it is just a sort of people don't like to feel like you're just coming in and telling them everything they've ever done is wrong. So then it turns into this defensive thing of, I've worked in this field for 15 years, blah, blah, blah. So, and I think it's also with a lot of the folks in engineering, appeal to them more with data sometimes, if that gets them connected. There's either two groups. There's connecting people with data because they're more numbers people, but then to the extent that you can bring them out to meet an actual customer, because in a gentle way, figure out the last time they actually heard from an actual customer. Some of those folks probably did when the company started 15 years ago, but time goes on, things get bigger, and you're not as connected because those roles get farmed out to other people. So if you can connect them through their own firsthand experience, that's probably what they trust more, is their own eyes and ears, than you trying to, make a slideshow about these customers and hope they'll be empathetic to it.
Right. And it's funny, Kelly has a similar question where, again, it's about getting buy-in for UX. So she comes from a large company in the defense industry where management believes that customers don't have any demand for user experience. In that situation, how might you better earn that sort of executive buy-in?
I would say there's probably also know your argument in your pitch. So that, I think that's always been a belief in a lot of industries. And then you see these disruptors come in with something, look at Workday, look at even the financial services stuff that's gone online and how much better banking websites are today. And it's easy for them to say, oh, nobody cares. As long as it gets the job done, it's fine. Some of the work that GE is doing today, and if you look at what IBM's doing, like, it does, that stuff actually is mattering, and people who are purchasing stuff for their employees, even like a product like Workday, which is, for those of you who don't know it, it's like you look up your company org chart and you can, if you're a people manager, you can use it to promote people, to set goals. It does all that. It is so nice to use. But if you look at the older systems, not to malign like SAP or some of those tools, those were like miserable tools. Another great example is Concur, which is for expenses. So if you can find examples, maybe they're using Concur to do their expenses. If you look at the mobile experience, it is so easy. And if you look at how it used to be to fill out your expenses, it was awful. So there's a lot of enterprise companies doing really good work who could have said, who cares? These companies buy it. They just give it to their employees, and those people have to suck it up. But, I do think that change is coming. And I'd say the other thing is, if you can show them that you still could do a good experience without it taking extra time, money, and resources, like, you are always building an experience. There's no reason you can't make a few choices that then make it end up being a better experience.
Right. And an anonymous viewer here actually had a question that's more about, as you start to conduct, those design thinking classes after, you have that executive buy-in. So this person is saying those classes look really extensive and well prepared. And so did you have a dedicated team to run those classes, or did you have to convince designers who are already buried in project-based work to, pull aside some time to dedicate towards that? Managing those resources and capacity can be tough, along with morale. So they're curious, how are you able to resource for that?
Satnam, who you had speak last week, he and I taught some. We also found in the design team the people who were natural teachers too. So we didn't push people to do it where that wasn't something. And it oddly turned out that some of the people on the team happened to be teaching at community college at night, not even design, but one of them taught math. So there are people who enjoyed that and found that rewarding. So if you're in a management role, or you're a person who would like to teach, if you let your manager know, like, I would actually enjoy spending my time doing this. But start small. Just start with like an hour-long lunchtime session, and then you can build out more from that, or grab some of the resources I shared. So you don't have to make it a 2-day training experience, but you should find people who are willing to make time in their schedule to do that because it's something they enjoy doing and want to spend their time on.
Right, right. And the next question here, it's a fairly straightforward one from MH. This person is curious about what would you say is the difference between design thinking and user-centered design, if you see any difference at all between the two terms?
I mean, on one level, I'd say there really isn't. I think it's more just historical. I feel like user-centered design tended to be talking more about products, that you were working on and how to do, the user research practices and usability in the design process. And I feel like design thinking is just a more broader term in that people are using it to apply design thinking to all sorts of problems. So like if we wanted to go right now have a session on like, how can we improve the environment? We'd say, hey, let's use some design thinking tools to do that. Let's, understand how people feel about the environment and brainstorm ideas and prototypes. So I feel like it just took the UCD out of just like our world of software and tool development into like just a broader, like, hey, this is applicable in a lot of realms, not just in a tech company.
Right, right. And Kevin B has an interesting question here about accessibility. So he's wondering if that conversation ever came up during a process where you had to revisit the accessibility of the products that you were working on, and did you find that there was any useful tactics for getting people to better understand the value of universal design and having reduced barriers to access and just overall more accessible products?
Yeah, so I say like yes, we run into that, particularly when you work at a scientific company. You think a lot about charts and graphs and color blindness, at least on those. I mean, some of the things that have helped, and I remember us doing this at Adobe, is sometimes having participants themselves who, have an accessibility, issue where, you're able to actually get direct feedback so people can see how things work. I mean, there's a couple other tricks you can do that don't involve you having to find someone. There's tools that I know you can use with Illustrator, and there's tools you can use with websites so you can view them as if you were colorblind. So it shows you what it would look like. And another great experience, if you've never done it, is to try a screen reader. So it's something that if you go to a website, you close your eyes and then you listen to what the website sounds like when a screen reader is reading it, and it helps you understand a bit about how the page needs to be structured, not so much from design, but also from development. So there's things like that you could do to help sensitize your team to like, hey, let's just experience this in a different way. Another little quick story on that. So one of my colleagues, Brian Moose, participated in a thing that one of the airlines was doing. I think it was JetBlue. They wanted to look at the experience of the disabled passengers. So he and several other folks went through the TSA screening process all the way up to being like loaded on an airplane in a wheelchair to see what that experience was like. So there's ways, depending on what industry you're in, and that was incredibly eye-opening to the team as you can imagine how different that experience is when you're going through it. So there's interesting stories you can find online about people simulating that to also learn about their products and what can be better.
Right, right. Yeah, it's actually a great question that the person brought up, because accessibility does seem like one of those. It's unfortunate, but sometimes accessibility is still seen as something like, oh, it's extra work we have to do to make this, to make this usable for a smaller segment of our audience. And sometimes if you can frame it as, well, most of accessibility is just sort of good design practices, that can help to overcome that barrier sometimes.
Exactly.
And Ivan actually has a very relevant question about personas. So he works in a company where he inherited a ton of personas, similar to what you experienced. And the product is also aimed at a fairly broad audience. Do you have any suggestions or tips about how you guys went about to shrink that persona pool?
Yeah, so I'll just tell you my experience now. switching jobs and industries is everywhere you go, they're like, oh, but our product has a really broad audience. Now I say, Microsoft Windows had a really broad audience in its day because like every computer had Windows. Most of the things we work on, it's a subset of that. So, that's just more my internal mindset, which is like, it's only bad because you work at the company. Like here at Illumina, we could slice and dice clinical and research scientists 100 different ways. But to some of you who don't work here, you'd say, hey, it sounds like you have clinical and research scientists. I see two personas in your world. So a lot of what we did at Citrix was we took everything we knew about the customers and those personas. And we just brainstormed, what are all the dimensions we could look at? So we just made this huge Excel spreadsheet. We said, how could they be different? They could work at a small company, a big company. They could have, a mixture of products. They could be a Citrix only shop. We just came up with that whole list. And then as we talked through it and started to make a matrix of people, you just start to see the similarities, and you also start to say, these are differences, but do they really matter in how the person would engage with like your product or service? And again, if you think about, iOS or Windows or those tools, we are all different in our jobs and things, but you might be able to look at more the behaviors of the users and say, but in general, we've got people whose goal is to do research and make publications, and the other people whose goal is to get a clinical diagnosis for a patient. And that's like two big categories, and that drives enough of their behaviors that we could design around them rather than having to say, well, some work for a hospital and some work for a clinic and some, have this specialty. So, it's a little bit stereotyping, but that's kind of what you need to do to like boil it down to a couple, the key things that make the people different that's going to matter for design.
Right. And I remember, and this even stems from our own experience, because UXPin is an enterprise tool in and of itself, because it's only used by people at work, but especially in enterprise environments, it helps to look at personas as sort of role-based personas and not so much, slicing and dicing for too many characteristics. I found it's been helpful. So if you look at, what are the core tasks and goals that people have when they're engaging with your product and kind of work around there, that can help sort of prevent you from creating too many personas because you're afraid that you're going to leave somebody out of, the equation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the other things we did is after we boiled down the Citrix personas to like 3 for the desktop, we had like a road warrior, we had someone who worked in this kind of more lockdown environment, and we had a third that was more like next gen college student. But then on the, say like the road warrior one, we wrote down, this might be a CEO, a doctor, a lawyer. So that the other people on the team who were like, yeah, but where's your CEO persona? We were like, see, they're here. They are actually the road warrior. And then like the person who worked in lockdown environments, we said, this is both our financial services customer and our healthcare customer, because even though we see them as different verticals, their behaviors are the same. Like they come to work, they can't take the computer home, they sometimes work on a shared computer. Like all these other things impact like how we think about the product. And so that helps people connect that sort of more, like you were saying, like that role-based thing to like, hey, you haven't forgotten about them, but we're kind of grouping them in this bucket.
Right, exactly. And that's almost the same thing that we found too at UXPin. If we look at our evolution of kind of personas in the process, our current personas are very condensed in that form too. Like we looked around, instead of thinking of all the multiple different titles that, designers or product folks might have, we really just boiled it down to what are the different goals that people have within the product, and we kind of worked outwards from there. So you went from goals to then the behaviors, and then you sort of look at the title as almost secondary to that core set of actions that they want to accomplish.
Yeah, that's great.
Great. Well, we are out of time here, unfortunately. So yeah, thank you, Julie, for your help here. This has been a really insightful presentation, showing people how the sort of evolution of design happened at Citrix. We had some great questions here from everybody who joined us. So thanks for that. And yeah, for everybody who joined us today, next week we will have Daniel Castro from Sumo Logic presenting on how to drive collaborative design in an enterprise team. He'll be sharing some tactics that work for him, and hope to see you all there. Yeah, thanks again, everybody. Thanks, Julie. And the session will be made available as recording with the slides after. So we'll be sending that out to you guys and also hosting it on our site. So if you, if you want to send it out to somebody who wasn't able to join or you just want to review it, it will all be totally possible. Great. Hope to see you guys all next week. And yeah, thanks, Julie.
Great. Thanks again. Take care. Have a great day, everyone.
Yep. Take care.
Bye.